This is the Bottom Line Podcast. I'm Jimmy Finizzi alongside Neil Villapiano. We hope you're doing well. As always, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to listen to us. We really do appreciate it. Before we get started, questions, opinions, you know the deal. Twitter at BottomLine, WMCX at The MVP Show. Use hashtag BottomLine. Leave a voice message on Anchor as well, or Anchor.fm. And make sure you subscribe on YouTube and also leave a like and a comment down below if you are watching on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe also on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for the Bottom Line Podcast, but please include my first name, which is Jimmy. Neil, before we get started with what we are doing today, and this is going to be a fun top 5 list we are going to do today. I actually, I did a little math the other night because, me doing math, go figure. Okay. Anyway, no, but I mentioned in a previous episode that this podcast has at least over 100 episodes, and I mentioned I did have to do the math exactly. Well, for once I did, and this episode in particular that we're doing right now is number 180. We are approaching 200 episodes of the Bottom Line Podcast, which is outstanding news. Yeah. There's definitely one positive of 2020. I'll say that much, but, but we're not going to get into all that. But nearly 200 episodes. Again, this is episode 180. The fact that we've gone this far is truly, truly amazing. Again, it started off as just little old me having no idea what the hell I was doing to eventually you coming on board, and I'm really, 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 really happy that you did. I'm happy that we reconnected after all these years to finally do this. It really has taken this podcast to a new level, as I like to put it. Neil, I thank you, and I thank you if you have been listening from the beginning. Thank you very much. If you're just joining us, welcome aboard, and we thank you very much. And if you tuned in from when Neil first came on, thank you. We just can't thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all the support that you've given me and especially to Neil. It really means the world to us. It really, really does.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Jimmy, for that. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been certainly a lot of fun. It's been now over a year, I think, since I started working with you on this podcast, and it's been a lot of fun.
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. So we are pushing it. Yeah, it's amazing how far, how quickly the time, time flies in when you do things like this. And it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. I like, having something like this to look forward to every single week, and just, being able to talk about things that we enjoy talking about, and coming up with things like we're talking about today that I think will be, I don't know if they will be as painful as they'll be very interesting, about just thinking about these contracts and wondering to ourselves what was exactly going through the minds of these people. But it should be, we like you said, we're very close to 200, and I don't know how I'll feel when we get to episode 200. That'll certainly be
it's definitely gonna be a whirlwind. I'll say that much.
Yeah,
but we definitely do have something planned for our 200th episode, but we're not gonna give anything away yet. We're still working out the details, but once we work out everything, we will certainly let you know. But like I said, if you have been listening from the beginning, or if you're just joining this podcast, thank you so, so much for helping not only me, but Neil get this far as well. And by the way, you can finally peep the background that I'm finally using for me. I finally got it to work. If you're watching on YouTube, I have part of the logo for our podcast, in case you're not watching on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube as well, you can also see the background to Neil's podcast as well, the Mofobo Network podcast, which you also should subscribe to, as well as the YouTube channel. Really, really good stuff. But
new episode coming out today.
Beautiful stuff. Right, by the way, on the YouTube video with your dad was really, 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 really interesting. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was an idea that, I kind of came up with, and it was something that I look at and I say, it was a lot of fun. It was good to, sit with someone like, my father, who knows sports, very well, and has been around for quite some time and has seen a lot of different sports and sporting events happen in his lifetime.
Right.
It's good to get a different perspective, maybe a little bit more realistic perspective than most that we get to talk to on a day-to-day basis. So it was a lot of fun. I certainly enjoyed it, and he'll definitely be back on at some other point. I think we're going to start to make this a every other week type of thing, kind of like a special segment, if you may,
that's gonna be sorry, Neil, go ahead.
No, I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. No, you were kind of cutting out a little bit. Your internet was being
so
weird,
were you.
so I apologize. But
yeah.
I understand what you were saying, but it was very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and also to his podcast as well, and subscribe to this podcast as well. It really does mean the world. And for those that have already, and again, you've been listening from the beginning, or you're just joining, thank you so much. Nearing 200 episodes. We will let you know what we have planned for that when the time comes.
Yep.
But with all that being said, we're going to have a lot of fun with this top 5 list today. As today, we have the top 5 most overpaid athletes. Now, we were debating on whether to do past or present. It's kind of hard to do present athletes because you don't know how their contracts are eventually going to fully play out. But I will say this, on my list, there's one athlete in particular that I could think of that is still playing that
Patrick Mahomes
kind of deserves to be on this list, but we'll get into that in a little bit.
It's probably
but
Patrick
as far
Mahomes,
as
ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, just make sure you but as far as we know, we mainly did past athletes who were overpaid. But for my particular list, I do have one present athlete and a couple of honorable mentions that are present athletes as well. But again, we'll get into that right now, actually. So Neil, without further ado, let's get started. Top 5 most overpaid athletes. Starting off with number 5 on my list. And I have a feeling that if this guy wasn't on here, this wouldn't be a legitimate list. And that would be A-Rod. Alex Rodriguez. Now, here's the funny thing about A-Rod.
Hold on. Which contract are you referring to?
Well, that's what I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
He had not one, but 2 massive contracts. He had one with the Texas Rangers, which was 10 years, $252 million, and one, obviously, with the Yankees, 10 years, $275 million. The contract I'm referring to is the Yankees contract that lands him on this list. Because, let's face it, outside of 2009, did he really do anything special? Not really. I mean, he did have his 600th home run one year.
What do you mean by special? Do you mean are you talking about on a postseason standpoint? Or
mainly postseason. I get it. He's had great moments in the regular season where he hit a 600th home run. I get that. 3,000th hit was a home run. I get that.
Yeah.
But did he really do anything in the postseason? Not really. Not to deserve that kind of money. I mean, he struck out a bazillion times. He barely came up clutch. I mean, he only averaged hitting 271 while only averaging 22 home runs a year, and he also missed all of 2014 because we all know what happened with the PED use and all that stuff. But really, again, outside of 2009, A-Rod didn't really do much. And I loved A-Rod. I loved watching him play. But he didn't really do anything that was clutch that makes him deserve all that money. I'm sorry, but A-Rod is 5 on my list because of that.
I can't really argue that because, like you said, when it came down to crunch time in the postseason, other than 2009, he really, really struggled with coming through in those big-time moments. Being the 3rd or 4th hitter in the lineup, being the main home run guy, the go-to guy. He really never did a good job of coming through when you really needed him to. And that's what made 2009 so special, and that's why, in my opinion, the Yankees did win the World Series that year, is because A-Rod needed to come through at some point. And luckily for him, he was able to come through, 7, 8, 9, 10 different times I could think of during that postseason. If it wasn't for Hideki Matsui, he probably would have won World Series MVP.
I agree.
Because he was just that dominant in the World Series against the Phillies. But yeah, in 2000, I think he signed that in December of 2007, and it went from 252 to 275, and he still had 3 years left on his 10-year 252 that he signed with Texas after he got traded there from Seattle. So, it was very interesting because, I think originally people were happy about it because through the first couple years he was there, albeit he wasn't doing well in the postseason, he was still hitting 40, 50 home runs a clip. He was still a tremendous Gold Glove third baseman. I mean, you think about the fact that he came from Texas where he was basically a shortstop. He was considered one of the top shortstops in the game other than Nomar Garciaparra or Derek Jeter.
Right.
He comes to the Yankees, he plays third base, and he becomes a Gold Glove third baseman, which you have to give credit where credit is due.
Right.
Did A-Rod live up to the contract he signed? No. Other than 2009, he didn't. So you think about it, through 9 of the 10 years that I don't know if I think he did go through did he go through? Yeah, he did. He did go through the entire contract, which I gave him a lot of credit.
He did.
Then again, the Yankees were probably not going to be able to trade him anywhere else, and I don't think he wanted to go anywhere else. But at the end of the day, for him to go through that whole contract and at least have 1 year of productivity where it led them to their most recent World Series, from that standpoint, it ended up paying out. But, for $275 million, I don't know. And maybe the Phillies should have looked at that because, Bryce Harper has the same agent as A-Rod did in Scott Boras. And they signed Bryce Harper to a $313 million
13-year contract, $325 million.
325. So, can you imagine what A-Rod, if he was, in his prime playing in today's game, could you imagine the type of deal he could get now? So, it's, at the end of the day, it was definitely a massive overpayment. And I'm surprised the Yankees didn't learn their lesson from that when they traded for Giancarlo Stanton. But, that's how the cookie crumbles. And look, I mean, for Stanton, he's only going into his third year with the team.
Right.
Maybe he can start turning it around if he stays healthy and actually is productive in the postseason. Because I really don't care what he does in the regular season. Like, if he hits 25 home runs this year, which, I mean, would make sense considering it's a 60-game season, I don't see how, he needs to come through in the postseason when it matters most. And that was the thing with A-Rod. That was the knock on him. And, yeah, definitely 10 years, 275, way too much money for a guy who came through in the postseason one time.
Yep. Way too much. So A-Rod is number 5 on my list of the top 5 most overpaid athletes. Number 4, Knick fans are going to say, really? You put this guy on the list?
Isaiah Thomas.
Eddie Curry. Eddie Curry. Now, here's why.
Of all the Knicks contracts, you went with Eddie Curry?
Well, here's why. He got paid for not playing a whole lot of games. Get this. 6 years, $60 million contract with the Knicks, made roughly $2 million a game and $645,000 per point. Per point. Outside of one good year he had, which was in 2006, he only played 10 games through a stretch of 2008 and 2010. He played 10 games in 2 years.
Yeah.
Is he really worth that much money? No. Sorry, Eddie Curry's number 4 on my list.
Well, honestly, the thing with Eddie Curry is simply this. He just got hurt. That wasn't something where he just stunk out the joint from the time he got to the Knicks. It's one of those unfortunate situations where you paid the guy money where you felt like he was going to end up earning that money because of what he was capable of doing. And then he just kept getting hurt and hurt. That's just one of the many unfortunate contracts the Knicks have signed over the years, whether it's because of injury or because of just, hoping against hope. I thought you would have gone with maybe like Stephon Marbury's contract because he flat out was just not good.
I definitely considered him. Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
You could have, I don't know if this would have counted as well, but you could have put in like Amari Stoudemire. Remember, because Amari Stoudemire was signed the same year that the Knicks were trying to get LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh to come to the Knicks.
Right.
And they failed on all three of those guys, and they ended up going with their plan B, I guess, option in Amari Stoudemire, who I think early on in his time with the Knicks was pretty good, especially when Melo came to the Knicks. But
his production fell off big time over the years.
Well, again, because of injuries.
Right.
You know, if he didn't put a hole through a glass containing, you know, a fire hydrant, he might have been okay. But, you know, I'm not mad that you selected Eddie Curry. I'm just surprised out of all the contracts, that was the one you went with, because for me, that's just he just got hurt most of the time. So that was a bad deal because he couldn't stay on the court.
Well, yes, but that's the one, to me at least, in my opinion, that stuck out the most.
We agreed to disagree on this. Clearly.
Okay, all right, that's fine. But Eddie Curry is 4 on my list, the top 5 most overpaid athletes. Number 3 is still playing, and he's only a kid.
It's Chandler Parsons.
In my opinion, he kind of deserves it because he's proved that he hasn't really been all about the hype.
Right.
I'm sorry, Rams fans, but Jared Goff is on my list.
Oh, okay.
That's right, Jared Goff. He is
currently
currently
you're going Mark Folger.
No,
I really thought that was where I was like, whoa.
Really? Out of all people,
he's signed a massive bad deal as well.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Anyway, keep going.
Anyway, but yes, I'm
Jared
sorry,
Goff.
Rams fans, but Jared Goff is number 3 on my list. He is currently under a 4-year contract worth $134 million, which he signed after he took the Rams to the Super Bowl. Yeah, how's that working out for you right now? Not really that well, is it? Well, he's looking more like the quarterback under Jeff Fisher rather than Sean McVay, because what has Jared Goff really done? What has he done? He's inaccurate most of the time. He throws the ball to the other team. He's not that good in the pocket. I mean, yeah, he's mobile a little bit, but has he really done much now? No. Now, I understand it may be a little unfair because he's still a kid, but it's been a few years. It's been a few years now. I mean, really, you at least have to live up to the hype of your contract. And for Jared Goff, I'm sorry, he is not worth $134 million. He's number 3 on my list.
Yeah, well, Jared Goff has clearly not been the quarterback that everybody thought he was going to be coming out of Cal. I mean, right. that's clear. The first time I heard about Jared Goff was actually in the original Elite 11 docu-series that they did the first time that they actually showed it. He was part of the original Elite 11 group, which was cool because that was the first time I had heard about Jared Goff. And he wasn't one of those quarterbacks that really wowed you. And to be fair, did he really do that much in college? No. And I understand that sometimes quarterbacks, you know, especially the good ones, don't always come out of big-time schools, and they don't always, you know, put up eye-popping stats. You know, Peyton Manning never won a Heisman Trophy, never won a national championship, but became one of the greatest and most consistent quarterbacks of the last generation.
Yep.
I think you can make that argument. Tom Brady went to Michigan, and the best thing that he did was he won an Orange Bowl against Alabama, and then he went to the 6th round. So, you know, it's things like that. But, like, I remember that was that discussion because it was Jared Goff or Carson Wentz. It was like, do you go with the guy who's played in Division I, played in the Pac-12, or do you go with Carson Wentz, who went to North Dakota State but won 2 or 3 national championships
right
with that dynasty? Because let's face it, North Dakota State is the best FCS school in the country. I mean, there's no question about it.
Agreed.
The only school that I think can compete with them at this point is probably James Madison. But that's a topic for a completely different day. You know, when I look at it, did the Rams make the mistake of drafting Jared Goff? I don't think they made the mistake because, let's face it, Carson Wentz is clearly injury prone. And so, you know, would Jared Goff had fit into, you know, the Eagles system, and would, you know, Carson Wentz fit into, you know, Sean McVay's system? I don't really know, to be honest with you. I don't think either one of them has been standouts. The problem for Carson Wentz is simply that had he not gotten hurt against the Rams, ironically, in his second season and, ended his entire year and the Eagles went on to win the Super Bowl, he probably would have won MVP. Maybe the Eagles still would have gone to the Super Bowl. I mean, they were that good anyway. Who knows? So I talking about Jared Goff's standpoint, this guy clearly is been vastly overrated. The offense of the Rams 2 years ago was really good. Their defense was suspect. It did improve as the year went on, because Wade Phillips is a very solid defensive coordinator. I wouldn't be surprised if he got another job. I think the Rams did let him go. So we'll see. But Jared Goff, I mean, other than that year, he's done nothing. Like, he's not that good. He's a below middle of the pack quarterback. I mean, there's some others that are obviously worse than he is, but still, I mean, he's not that great of a quarterback. He doesn't have the world's greatest arm. His accuracy is suspect. Like Urinating Tree always says, he clearly can't throw a football. And I think that's pretty
By
true.
the way, follow Urinating Tree on Twitter if you're not. Please. I mean, it is fantastic.
People will crucify me for saying this, but I think that Mitch Trubisky is better than Jared Goff.
What?
And Mitch Trubisky, because look at it this way. Mitch Trubisky has an arm. He could throw the ball 60, 70 yards. Does he have great accuracy? Hell no. He tends to overthrow every single time. But Jared Goff struggles to throw 30-yard routes to Cooper Kupp. And when you have an offensive line like they've had where it's been pretty solid, and, Mitch Trubisky hasn't, I mean, it's tough. And remember, Mitch Trubisky came out of college not knowing what a hard count was. Like, think about that.
That's true.
And Mitch Trubisky still, in my opinion, has been more successful. I don't think the Rams got to the Super Bowl because of Jared Goff. The Rams got to the Super Bowl because the offense that was implemented into them was tough for any team to stop. You go back to that game between the Rams and the Chiefs a couple of years ago. It was a shootout.
Yep.
It was like, what was it, like 50-45? It was a damn shootout on Monday night. Oh, no, excuse me,
one of the best games I've ever seen.
One of the biggest offensive games I certainly have ever seen. It was definitely a quarterback duel. But, when the Rams got to the Super Bowl against the Patriots, they sucked. Jared Goff was awful. And their offense has never been the same. They're in massive cap strain, and they gave Jared Goff like the third highest contract in the NFL. It was number 2 before obviously Mahomes got his deal. It was the second highest one behind Carson Wentz.
Yep.
So at the end of the day, Jared Goff, massive overpayment for a guy that will probably in a year or two just be a backup somewhere else.
Yep, absolutely. But I wholeheartedly disagree that Mitch Trubisky is better than him, but we can get into that argument another day. But Jared Goff is number 3 on my list of the top 5 most overpaid athletes. Quick recap here for you. Number 5, A-Rod. Number 4, Eddie Curry. Number 3, Jared Goff. Number 2, Ryan Howard. Now, why do I have Ryan Howard?
Oh, this is a
now. Why do I have him on my list? Well, it's because of this.
For good reason.
Following the 2011 season, the Phillies signed him to a 5-year contract worth $125 million. Since he signed that contract, he averaged 17 home runs, 119 strikeouts, and only batted .223. Does that sound like a guy that's worth $125 million? Sorry, no. And one could argue. What's that?
He also got hurt.
Well, that's another factor. Yep. And one could argue, by the way, that contract is one of the worst contracts in baseball history. Now, did he have some good years with the Phillies? Absolutely, yes. But other than that, after 2011, he sucked. He wasn't that good. Plus, his career was on the decline anyway, so why'd you even bother? So, sorry, Philly fans. Ryan Howard is number 2 on my list of overpaid athletes.
I can't, with this one, I can't really complain and I can't really argue it because it's true. I mean, Ryan Howard, he was in his prime one of the most feared home run hitters in the game. But by the time you reach 2011, 2012, being a big home run hitting first baseman was starting to go down the drain, as Chris Davis has unfortunately shown us over the last couple of years with his contract. That should, I think, that's somebody, that's somebody that I'm actually really pulling for, because I really wish people would get off his back, because it wasn't necessarily his fault, but, it's
right.
fine. Anyway, Ryan Howard was not where the Phillies were on the back end of their quote unquote competitive dynasty era, from 2007 to 2011-12, they were one of the best, if not the best team in the National League. And they probably could have won another World Series or two had things gone their way. Had they faced anyone but the Yankees in 2009, they would have won the World Series in my opinion. That's the way I look. Because that was a dominant team. And you have to remember this. Around that same time, they also still had Chase Utley. They still had Jimmy Rollins. They still had Carlos Ruiz. Oh, and by the way, they had arguably one of the greatest assortment of starting pitchers in Major League Baseball history in Roy Halladay, Cliff Lee, Roy Oswalt. They still had Cole Hamels. And I think they still had Blanton as well, and Blanton was still okay. But you think about it. You had 3 Cy Young Award winners. Think about it. You're playing in a 3 or 4 game series. That's who you're facing.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. And they signed Ryan Howard to that deal because he was still being relatively productive. But unfortunately, he did, like I said, he did get hurt, and he was never the same. And the Phillies had to buy him out of that, monstrosity of a deal. But it was a combination of getting injured and also that the times had changed. The Phillies were getting to that point where a lot of their main guys were getting older, and being a big slugging first baseman was a dying type of player to be. And you can look at it now. A lot of the first basemen that are in the major leagues, they're not big hulking first basemen. I mean, Luke Voit is sort of like that, but it's okay. Pete Alonso, he's not a big hulking first baseman. He can hit home runs, but he's not a big hulking first baseman. Other guys like Eric Hosmer, he's not gigantic. He's not like a David Ortiz, or Frank Thomas or Ryan Howard big. He's just solid. Freddie Freeman, he's not a big hulking first baseman. That man can hit over 300 if he wanted to.
Yeah.
And he's got decent speed. Ryan Howard, his main objective was to hit home runs. It was either hit a home run or strike out. And that was what it was. And it's fair to say that when the Phillies signed that deal, they were going to regret it right from the get-go. And that's exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, again, I'm sorry if you're a Phillies fan, but he deserves to be on my list. Top 5 overpaid.
He was one of my favorite players growing up.
Me too. Me too.
Growing up.
Me too. Absolutely. And he has his number retired at First Energy Park, along with Cole Hamels.
Right. We're at the Blue Claws, right? I was
Yep. By the way, if you don't know what we're talking about, the Blue Claws are in Lakewood, New Jersey.
Yeah. I don't think the Phillies have retired his number yet. Could be wrong.
I'm not
in the
100%
fame,
sure.
That's for sure.
What's that?
He might be in the Wall of Fame. That's for sure.
Well, yes. And
the Phillies don't really retire numbers. They just put a plaque in the They have a memorial. Oh, what the heck do they call it? What do they call it?
Wall of Fame?
Stadium? No, what do they call it at Yankee Stadium?
Monument Park.
They have something similar to that where it's just like plaques of every great player that's played for them.
I gotcha. But another quick recap.
By the way, I'm still writing down information. If anybody's wondering what I'm doing.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Don't even worry about it, my man. So quick recap here. Top 5 most overpaid athletes. Number 5, Alex Rodriguez. Number 4, Eddie Curry. Number 3, Jared Goff. Number 2, Ryan Howard. And as always, before we get to number 1, a couple of honorable mentions here. Jacoby Ellsbury. I don't think anything more needs to be said about that. We're moving on.
Oh, now, wait, hold. Is that over yet? No, seriously, I don't even know. Is it done?
I actually think it is. I think it's finally over, but
So they
Jacoby
replaced
Ellsbury.
Jacoby Ellsbury's ridiculous contract with Giancarlo Stanton's ridiculous contract. Okay. Cool.
Well,
But then again, it's the Yankees, so they can afford to do that.
well,
It's
yes,
it's not like the Pirates, signed Andrew McCutchen to a 10-year, $275 million deal, and we're like, yeah, we just don't have the money to.
That's true. That's true. But nothing more needs to be said about Jacoby Ellsbury.
Well,
but
let's just move on.
And speaking of Stanton, I'm sorry, but he's another honorable mention. Now, I understand. It's only been a few years in New York, but let's face it, he hasn't lived up to that contract. So yeah, I'm sorry. Unless he proves me wrong over these next few years, he's overpaid. I'm sorry.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily argue with that. The only reason at all that I would sit here and say, I kind of disagree is because he's still playing. A lot of the guys you mentioned, other than like Jared Goff, aren't playing anymore, and they kind of went through that contract. Like that contract's no longer active.
Right.
It's harder with Stanton because, again, for all we know, he could come out the next 3 or 4 years and just be a dominant player and be clutch in the playoffs. And all of a sudden, that massive contract looks really good because it's like, okay, we're paying him so much money, but he's doing really well. Like that. Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. But yeah, I do get where you're coming from because, again, it's not that the Yankees signed the contract because they didn't. It was the Marlins. You have to give Derek Jeter credit for finding a way, albeit it was with the Yankees, but just finding a way to get the Yankees to pay 3/4 of the contract. I think a percentage of it is also being paid by the Marlins as well.
I think so, yes.
Again, that also wasn't Derek Jeter. That was Jeffrey Loria, before he finally sold the team. They signed him to that big, ridiculous deal. I don't think he would have gotten that same deal on the free agent market had he gone to the free agent market. But, again, definitely not the type of contract the Yankees, for the Yankees that's paid off. That's for sure. At least not yet.
Nope, absolutely. Nope, not yet. But hopefully it does pay off within the next few years. But as of right now.
What about this
year? Nope. Sorry, Yankee fans. And I am a Yankee fan, but I'm sorry. He is vastly overpaid right now. Andrew Wiggins. He's basically getting paid to be like a superstar, and he is not a superstar player in the NBA. I'm sorry. And also, one more here. Yoenis Cespedes. Has he really lived up to the contract the Mets gave him? No, he hasn't. Oh, and by the way, not to mention that while he was nursing with a heel injury, he was playing golf while hurt, and he still got paid $29 million. So, I'm sorry. Yoenis Cespedes has not done anything to prove to me that he is worth the money that he's making right now. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I would argue with the fact that with Cespedes and the whole thing with the golf situation, golf is, for a lot of athletes, a way to actually recover. Unless you're Tiger Woods or Phil Mickelson, where you because I know Tiger Woods has hurt himself dramatically several times playing golf. But it's kind of a way to recuperate in a way, because you're not really doing all that much, really massively physically. I know he did also get hurt while bull riding. Why he chose the bull ride is beyond my own recollection, is beyond my comprehension. Excuse me. It's that was only the Mets. The good news for the Mets is that they can just make Cespedes a DH. And they could just leave him there. So I think that's what the Mets are probably going to do. But yeah, when they signed him to that deal after making the trade, which by the way, I want to say that when they made the deal to get Cespedes, it made a lot of sense because they didn't give up that much. If you go back to the trade that they made with Detroit to get Yoenis Cespedes, they only gave up, I think, 2 mid-tier prospects. It's not they had to give up like an arm and a leg for him.
Right.
And they did sign him to a big deal, but only because that was pretty much the only way they were going to keep him. I mean, Cespedes was probably going to go somewhere else for a big deal, especially after he had performed in the second half of the season. In the postseason, not so much. He turned back into a pumpkin. It was not really great. And Cespedes, unfortunately, has just never been able to have I don't think he's had a full season since he signed with the Mets.
I don't think so, no.
So, maybe because Cespedes looks like he's definitely going to be playing when the season starts. they're going to keep him as a DH, which is fine. I think that's exactly what you need to do. And we'll see. But yeah, that contract that he signed, one of the many Mets contracts that are not good. Probably the worst, in my opinion, is definitely Bobby Bonilla. I don't think because they're still paying it. You know, it's not like it's over. They're paying it for another 25 years.
Yep.
Or another 15, excuse me.
15 more years of this garbage, 2035. But anyway, yes, those are my honorable mentions. So before we get to number one more quick recap here on my list of the top 5 most overpaid athletes. Number 5, A-Rod. Number 4, Eddie Curry. Number 3, Jared Goff. Number 2, Ryan Howard. Honorable mentions, Jacoby Ellsbury, Giancarlo Stanton, Andrew Wiggins, and Yoenis Cespedes. And number one...
I think I know what...
Well, some people call him a bust. Now we're going to call him overpaid, because I did my research on this man last night. And he, quite frankly,
was trash.
Given the fact that he was absolutely abysmal, he deserves to be on this list. And that would happen to be...
Can I guess before you reveal it? Can I just...
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. Was he a quarterback?
Yes.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this. Go ahead, say it. Say it.
Then you know exactly where I'm going.
Go ahead, say it.
Jamarcus Russell. Jamarcus Russell is number 1 on my list. Now, before you jump me and say, oh, it's so obvious, well, hear me out.
It is obvious.
Thank you, Neil. Here's the thing. He signed a 6-year, $68 million contract before his rookie season.
Yeah, I know.
Before his rookie season. And I really don't think any more needs to be said, except for this. He only completed 52% of his passes and threw 23 interceptions over 3 years.
Yeah.
3! I don't think any more needs to be said about Jamarcus Russell. He is not only one of the biggest busts of all time, but he is probably the most overpaid athlete of all time, at least to me.
Oh, yeah, there's no question about it. Jamarcus Russell, or Stephen A. Smith liked to call him Jabba the Hutt. I mean, look, it's, there are worse names you could be called. If you're Jared Lorenzen, I'm sure you could say that there's certainly worse names to be called. Rest in peace, by the way. Trying to, okay, so that year, 2007? Yeah, 2007. Yeah. That was the first year that I actually watched the draft. I was only about 10 years old, or just pushing 10 years old. Obviously, as a Raiders fan, I'm also a Giants fan, but, Raiders fan for obvious reasons. I used to watch, there was this one clip where, Jamarcus Russell would go on one knee and he would throw a football. And he could throw a football 80 yards on a knee.
Right.
Which was impressive, no doubt. And people say, oh, well, Calvin Johnson was in that draft. Well, to be fair, Calvin Johnson went to Georgia Tech, and he played in an option offense for the most part. It was kind of hard to determine if, as we know now, Megatron was going to be as good as he was. Had the Raiders known that, they would have probably taken Calvin Johnson number 1 overall. Nobody would have taken Jamarcus Russell. Maybe in the later rounds, but I don't think legitimately anybody would have done that. So you look at that and you say to yourself, what the hell were the Raiders thinking? Well, to me, I'm going to be very honest with you. As much as I love Al Davis, at that point in his life, he was pretty much ancient. His decision making was not good. And that was
this was also the guy, and God rest his soul now, but this was the guy who said he's going to be the next Peyton Manning, the next Steve Young, the next Joe Montana. Well, I'm sorry, and no disrespect to Al Davis, and again, God rest his soul. How'd that work out?
Well,
sorry, not well.
Look, at the end of the day, like I said, it was at the point in his life where he wasn't as sharp as he normally was. But Jamarcus Russell is the type of player that Al Davis would take if he was playing in the 80s. He loved the big arm, could throw the ball a country mile quarterback. He loved Dan Marino. If he had been able to make a deal, to move up in the draft, he probably would have taken Dan Marino. Or he could have just taken him with that pick anyway. He had a deal in place with the Bears to trade up to get Dan Marino. He didn't do it, but still, it would have been that was the type of quarterback that Al Davis liked. But yeah, the Raiders went into it, and look, the Raiders didn't have a lot of talent around Jamarcus Russell. Their coaching sucked. The Raiders were a shell of what they once were. They all expected Jamarcus Russell to come in and be the savior. The reality was Jamarcus Russell was not very motivated to be the best quarterback he could be. He cared about the money. He cared about, certainly eating, that's for sure. And as a result, he had 3 abysmal seasons with the Raiders and just kind of continuously signified how bad they were. Now, they were able to get some more talent the years after because they continued to be bad. I think they ended up drafting Darren McFadden,
right?
Who was a very good running back. Darius Hayward-Bay was a very solid wide receiver, and I would have loved to have seen him stay long-term. But the reality, until Derek Carr came into the fold, the Raiders were always struggling to find a franchise quarterback. They had gone through several. They had Jason Campbell for a while. They brought in old Carson Palmer, who really didn't want to be there. But
did they have Matt McGloin too?
They had him to be the backup to Derek Carr.
Right.
So,
Okay.
He did play because Derek Carr ended up getting hurt at one point. But the Raiders are still kind of struggling with finding a quarterback that the fans feel 100% comfortable with. That's why you heard about them trying to make a move to maybe bring in Tom Brady. That's why they kind of brought in Marcus Mariota this year. But going back to Jamarcus Russell, yeah, he was abysmal. From the time he got to the Raiders to the time he was gone, he was abysmal. And, he's going to be one of the biggest draft busts in NFL history. Is he worse than Ryan Leaf? I think a lot of people have asked that question. Probably, because at least with Ryan Leaf, you could say he had a little bit of success early on in his career. Jamarcus Russell really never got off the ground. He really just struggled from the time he got there. And that was not 100% his doing, because when you're the savior of the franchise all of a sudden and you don't have a lot of talent around you, unless you're one of those guys that could just make other players around you better, you're going to struggle. And he never got the talent that he needed, but he never had the motivation to get better in any circumstance. So it was a wasted first overall pick, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah. Wasted is an understatement, and definitely one of the most overpaid athletes of all time. So that is my list, top 5 most overpaid athletes. A-Rod, number 5. Eddie Curry, number 4. Jared Goff, number 3. Number 2, Ryan Howard. And number 1, Jamarcus Russell. And with that being said, Neil, the floor is yours.
Okay, so here is my top 5 most overpaid athletes of all time. Number 5, we're going to start with Mark Sanchez, the Sanchez. And here's the thing. It wasn't like Sanchez signed a big money deal that right in the middle of his career and then everything went to crap. It was more like this. In 2000, his first 3 seasons in the NFL, 2009, 2010, 2011, the first 2 years, they went to the AFC Championship game. The Jets were on the cusp of getting to the Super Bowl. They were right there. And they had a lot of talent around Mark Sanchez as well. You had LaDainian Tomlinson, Santonio Holmes, Jason Taylor. You had Braylon Edwards. You had Cromartie. You had Darrelle Revis. You had a lot of talent on both sides of the football. So clearly, and Mark Sanchez was very good coming out of college. They did a really good job with him for the most part. But because, as we know, Rex Ryan's a very defensive, grounded pound type of coach, they never, I don't think they fully maximized the abilities that Mark Sanchez had. But here are the quarterback rankings, because they do all 30 NFL teams. Here was Mark Sanchez's ranking in his first 3 seasons. In 2009, he was 28 out of 30. Not very good. 2010, he was 27 out of 30. He made very minuscule progress. 2011, he got to 23. So at least from 2010 to 2011, he did seem to get better.
Right.
By 2011, he was the 3rd highest paid quarterback in the NFL, with making $14.25 million. If you want to compare, his contract to someone else's, compare Cam Newton's contract, because in 2011 he was a rookie. God. Cam Newton was making $10 million less. He was making $4.25 million and was already way better than Mark Sanchez. You know what? You know what Cam Newton's ranking was in 2011? 15. He was already better than Mark Sanchez. And as we all know, and as most Jets fans know, and you haven't, go read my book and you'll find out, the Jets never got anywhere closer to becoming Super Bowl champions with Mark Sanchez. They screwed around with him.
Pain.
Exactly. They screwed around with him. They eventually went to Geno Smith, and Mark Sanchez kind of went around the league for a couple more years before becoming an analyst at ESPN and Fox. So it's not that the Jets made a massive overpayment for Mark Sanchez, but again, when you compare his contract to what the Jets were paying him to what Cam Newton was making, and just
it's pretty bad.
Even in the NFL, you kind of say to yourself, maybe 2009, 2010 was the high point, as it clearly showed it was, and was not going to get any better. And so even now, the Jets are still trying to figure out if they have a franchise quarterback. Is it going to be Sam Darnold? Who the hell knows? We'll see. But
for Jets fans' sake, let's hope so, because you haven't had a really good quarterback since either Joe Namath or Vinny Testaverde. So what are we talking about here?
Right, exactly. What are we talking about here? But I don't know if you want to call this an overpayment, but I mean, I kind of do, considering it's.
I would.
Jets,
I would absolutely.
And it's pretty bad. I mean, you could have obviously thrown Neil O'Donnell in there, maybe as like a worse contract to sign, being a free agent. But again, it just when I was doing my research, it kind of made sense. So that was kind of an interesting one, and that's why I put it at 5, because it's not crazy,
right?
But it's still pretty bad considering when I show you the comparisons.
No, right, yeah.
Number 4 is a guy that you mentioned before, and that's Alex Rodriguez. In December of 2007, like you mentioned, he agreed to a 10-year, $275 million deal because he had opted out of the last 3 years of his 10-year, $252 million deal they signed with the Texas Rangers. And there isn't much else that I can say other than what we were talking about, a half hour ago about it. Again, with Alex Rodriguez, the biggest knock on him throughout the majority of his career, I would say mostly with the Yankees, is that he just wasn't clutch in the playoffs. He came, a lot of time he would come up, he would pop up, he would strike out. He wouldn't come through when you needed him to.
Or he would ground out.
Right. In 2009, it all changed.
Right.
It all changed, and he was able to come through, and finally that contract was kind of worth it. And it was only in the 3rd year of its deal. So again, you would have thought, okay, now this is that A-Rod that we're finally going to be able to, see and expect from. And he never really did anything else that's significant in the postseason after 2009. So It's unfortunate for the Yankees, but luckily for them, they could afford it, and they could just go through it without, killing themselves. Right. I don't know how many other teams in Major League Baseball could have dealt with that without either buying him out or trying to force some sort of trade with another team. But, Alex Rodriguez, one of my favorite Yankees growing up. But again, it was definitely a massive overpayment, a really bad decision, and another one of the many Scott Boras wet dream, let's try to get as much money as possible type of moves. And to this day, Scott Boras is still doing that. So, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the way.
Yep. In the words of the great Chris Mad Dog Russo, one lousy time he came up. Lousy time.
It's very true. One single postseason he came through. And other than that, nothing. So that's number 4 on my top 5 most overpaid athletes. Number 3 is one that's a little bit more near and dear to my heart. Very frustrating because this guy signed a deal that was illegal. First of all, this deal was illegal, and I'll explain. And that is Ilya Kovalchuk when he signed his deal with the New Jersey Devils.
Dang! All right.
So in 2000, so let me see if I have my numbers here. Right. In 2010, at the trade deadline, Ilya Kovalchuk was traded from the then Atlanta Thrashers, who eventually
to the New Jersey Devils.
Yes, to the Devils. And he did a really solid job in the half season he was there. They nearly made the playoffs. And again, they almost made the playoffs the next year. But prior to the 2010-11 season, Ilya Kovalchuk was going to be a free agent. So the Thrashers wanted to move him, because they wanted to get some value for him. Well, the Devils immediately went to work on trying to sign him long term. And he originally signed a 17-year, $102 million deal, which at that point,
it's illegal.
Was the richest contract in NHL history. No player, not Wayne Gretzky, not Mario Lemieux, not Guy Lafleur, not Maurice the Rocket Richard.
Not even Sidney Crosby.
Not even Martin Brodeur had a deal that exclusive.
No.
But here's the problem. The NHL rejected the deal, and I'll explain why. The problem that the NHL had with the deal is that it revolved around cap circumvention. Now, what does that mean? Well, let me explain. Basically, that means that the player who signs the contract can get more money under the table than what he's actually due on the cap. So basically what, Vanderbeek, who was the original, which is the owner prior to David Blitzer and Joshua Harris, he wanted to get this deal done. He was hoping to get the Russian money from, the Nets owner, whose name escapes me at the moment. Not now, but Prokhorov, excuse me. There was all these under the deal type of moves. And Lou Lamoriello has said before that he never really wanted to make that massive of a deal. I think they were originally looking to try to get a 7-8 year deal, which would have made a lot more sense.
Right, yes.
But to do 17 years was pretty ridiculous. So again, the way it was pronounced was Kovalchuk was expected to get more money than what he was actually due in order for the Devils to save some cap space for something else. And the NHL said, that's illegal. You can't do that. So the Devils were penalized. They were fined $3 million and a 2011 third-round pick and a 2014 first-round pick. The deal went down to a 10-year, I think, $100 million deal. So they brought down the years to calm down the things. And Kovalchuk did well in his first year. He was solid throughout the majority of the 2012 season when the Devils ended up going to the Stanley Cup Finals. He did play through injury. He did play, the shortened season in 2013, and he did struggle from times staying healthy. And then in the off season, going into the 2013-14 season, right after the Devils had made the trade to acquire Corey Schneider to be the eventual, takeover for Martin Brodeur, Ilya Kovalchuk announced his retirement from the National Hockey League, moved to Russia, and stayed there for a few years until 2 years ago. He came back as a free agent and signed with the LA Kings. And now he has played with the Montreal Canadiens. And right now he is with the Washington Capitals, looking at 36 years old to try to win that elusive Stanley Cup. Let me be honest with everybody. That contract is one of the biggest reasons the Devils have been in the position they're in even now, even to this day.
Yep.
Because Ilya Kovalchuk would still technically be on the team if he kept playing on this contract. The reality was simply this. Ilya Kovalchuk wanted to play in New York or Los Angeles. The Devils were the closest team who gave him the money that was in one of those areas. The reality, he never wanted to play in New Jersey. He was happy that he got to play close to New York, but he really did want to play in New York City or Los Angeles. He wanted to get out of this deal as quick as he could. And once he saw that the team was no longer going to be competitive and was going to start, bringing in younger players, he wanted out. So what was the best way to do it? Well, he couldn't get traded because nobody was going to take on his monstrosity of a deal. So instead, he made a plan to retire, go play 3 or 4 years in Russia, and then come back once his contract is no longer void, and he could come in as a free hockey player.
Yep.
He was originally trying to come in the year before, but the problem was the Devils still owned his rights. He had to wait 3 or 4 years before the Devils' rights were up, and he could come back to the NHL, and that's what he did. He did that. That was his whole plan, and to this day, he is one of the most disliked, despised players when he comes to New Jersey. He tends to play well against the Devils when he comes back for many reasons, because let's face it, Kovalchuk is still a very solid goal scorer. There is no question about it. It's just something that we have trouble accepting because it was a deal that was ridiculous. It cost the Devils money. It cost the Devils picks. The only positive that came out of it is that he helped the Devils reach the Stanley Cup Finals in 2012, and then he bailed. And that was pretty much it. He pretty much said he didn't want to play in New Jersey. He bailed, and now he's back in the league trying to win a cup. That was one of the worst deals orchestrated in NHL history. And it's one of the things that has prevented the Devils, in my opinion, from ever getting back to being a competitive team. You know, and it still haunts a lot of us to this day. And it's 7 years now since he left the team.
The fact that the deal was illegal says a lot too.
Well, that's the original 17-year.
Who's signing a 17-year deal? Nobody I know.
It was ridiculous. That was number 3 on my list because, again, I don't think there's any deal that was worse. Now, maybe who I have as an honorable mention might be a little bit different, but, you know, we'll see. But that is number 3 on my list, and, yeah, that was one that I will never be able to live down. Number two, we haven't mentioned the NBA at all, so I thought I'd mention it because when I thought about it, I said, you know, a lot of players in the NBA get these monstrosity, you know, types of deals.
Right.
And most of them, I would say, do pan out one way or another. But has there ever been one that was so bad that you just couldn't, you know, it could be, you know, deemed as the worst in NBA history? Well, I think I found one.
Oh, boy.
Chandler Parsons, when he signed with the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, in 2016, when Chandler Parsons was a free agent coming off of a career year with the Mavs,
I'm pretty sure she would agree with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Chandler Parsons signed a 4-year, $94.5 million contract with the Memphis Grizzlies. Chandler Parsons, like I mentioned, had a breakout season in his walk year, which tends to be the case with a lot of players, knowing that their contract is up. They're going to be free agents, so they want to make sure they play well enough where they can get a lot of money.
Yep.
Chandler Parsons averaged 13.7 points per game, 4.7 rebounds per game, and 2.8 assists per game. Pretty solid for a small forward, I would say.
Right.
Small forward, power forward. Very good player. And he was still very young. So a lot of people felt his potential, he hadn't reached his potential yet. So the Grizzlies saw this as an opportunity, and they signed him to a huge deal. And right from the beginning, it did not pan out. He dealt with injuries for several years, and during his time with the Grizzlies, he averaged 7.1 points per game, 2.5 rebounds per game, and 1.8 assists per game. Everything went down, down, down. I think he's still playing in the NBA, but he is not the player that he was expected to be. The Grizzlies have never really recovered from that. I mean, obviously now with the young players that they have, John Morant, Jackson, guys like that, they're on the rise. But it's only recently that they're on the rise because they had to deal with that. They had to deal with that ridiculous contract, also the contract of Mike Conley and Marcus Gasol and Zach Randolph. They had a lot of money problems, especially being a small market like Memphis. It was going to be bad.
Yep.
So, unfortunately, the Grizzlies are going to be known as signing one of the worst contracts in NBA history to just one player who, again, like Eddie Curry, spent a lot of time, taped up, injured, not very successful. And that was pretty much the demise of Chandler Parsons. But still, for a guy that, to be honest, I don't think was ever really as good as people, made him out to be. The injuries definitely didn't help him. And as a result, that money was definitely not well spent without a doubt. So
no.
that was a bad one. That was a bad one, no doubt. But that's number 2 on my list. And I have 2 honorable mentions.
Okay.
First one is David Price's contract with the Boston Red Sox.
Ooh.
He signed a 7-year, $217 million deal back in December of 2015. And he decided to opt into part of his contract in 2018. And as a result, he was able to win a World Series. Mm-hmm. But he was not the pitcher that the Red Sox were hoping that he would become. He did pretty well when he went to Detroit. He was solid in his short time with Toronto, and he came up as a phenom closer, ladies and gentlemen, with the Tampa Bay Rays. But when he got to the Red Sox, it was one of the many handfuls over the last 10 years of massive overpayments by the Boston Red Sox. He struggled with injuries. It seemed like at times he wasn't that interested in trying to get better. A lot of people criticize him because he played a lot of video games and things like that. And yeah, he basically became a salary dump. And thankfully for the Red Sox, they were able to move him to LA, to the Dodgers, in the Mookie Betts deal a few months ago.
Yep.
And David Price decided to opt out of this season. I don't know if the Dodgers still have to pay him. I imagine they would, but that was one of the worst contracts I saw pitchers sign in baseball history. I don't think I've seen something with so little in return. Even though he did win a World Series, he wasn't anything great, and he really stunk to join out when it came to facing the Yankees in Yankee Stadium.
Oh.
The Yankees knew when they played him, they had a field day against him. You know
yeah.
what?
The Yankees have always had his number, though, even when he was with Tampa, right?
Well, to a lesser extent, because again, David Price was a closer for the most part in Tampa.
Yes.
Yeah, in Detroit, they did do well. They always seem to have his number, but particularly when he was with the Red Sox, they did a lot of damage against him. So he's one of my honorable mentions. My other honorable mention is probably the second worst contract ever signed in National Hockey League history, and that is when the New York Islanders in 2006 signed Rick DiPietro to a 15-year, $67.5 million deal.
That's not fair. Come on, man.
Why is it not fair?
Really?
Why is it not fair?
His career ended because of injury.
Oh, so Eddie Curry's contract is worse?
Oh my God.
The same thing. The same thing as Chandler Parsons. Look, these are the usual reasons why these contracts are bad. Way too much money, guy probably got hurt, or guy sucked. I mean, it's one of those situations. For DiPietro, he got hurt. You're absolutely right, Jimmy. Look, the year after he signed that deal, 06-07, he went 32-19-9 with a .919 save percentage and a 2.58 goals against average. That's great. I mean, that's phenomenal. But injuries did slow him down, and from 2008, 2009 to 2012, 13, he played in 50 freaking games and was bought out of the last 8 years of his deal. First of all, who has ever thought it was a good idea to sign a goaltender to a deal that long? Nobody. Because guess what? Goalies, in many ways, are like running backs. They come a dime a dozen. It's very hard to find a goaltender that can play 10 plus years in the league and be good. That's the thing. There aren't that many. It just doesn't happen. And nowadays, with the NHL teams looking to have two very solid goaltenders, no goalie's going to get massive amounts of money. So if Braden Holtby thinks he's getting $9-10 million this year if he's a free agent, it's just not going to happen for many different reasons, mostly involving the economic states with COVID-19. But Rick DiPietro, before that contract and even the year after, was very solid, and it looked like it might pay off. But guess what? They had no money to spend on anything else. They literally just relied on Rick DiPietro, and I think, honestly, he got overworked. That was his problem. That's why I don't fault him. He got overworked because they had nothing else. And that's what led to him getting all those injuries and constantly, not performing, to the point where the Islanders realized how terrible this deal was. At the end of the day, though, Rick DiPietro was always a solid goaltender. He was, and you can't fault him for that. But just 15 years, I mean, that's really bad, especially when you had to buy out the last 8 years of the deal. I mean, his contract would have been up. The last year of his deal would have been this next season. Think about that. Think about that. That's, and who knows how DiPietro would have been had he stayed healthy. We don't know. And it's unfortunate, but it is one of the worst. It's definitely the second worst contract I've ever seen in NHL history because of the very little return that the Islanders could get, but it's their fault. It's their fault because they didn't try to help him because they gave him too much money. If they had tried to work out a smaller deal for 7 or 8 years and spread their money out through other resources like, I don't know, getting a competent head coach, maybe getting some young players, drafting a lot better, they might have done better. They might have been able to, but you should never pay a goaltender that much money for that long of term because it's just like a running back. You need to have good defense around him. You need to have solid scoring if you want him to be successful. He's not always going to be able to stand on his head and win you 25, 30, 35 games a year. Corey Schneider dealt with that for several years where he had mediocre defense and lousy goal scoring and had to carry the team. That's why you see him being hurt as much as he is right now. He's been overused. That was Rick DiPietro's problem. But I don't put him on the list because of him specifically. Because if he was bad after he signed that deal and it wasn't injuries, then you can knock on him. But this is more on the Islanders, that they overused him, they paid him too much money, and they paid the heavy price for it. And that's the problem. So, there you go.
Well, all right. Well, if you go that perspective, all right, fine, I get it. But whatever. Just continue, please. Just.
See, I got you. See, you can't argue it any further because you know what I said is true and what I said is right. It's not DiPietro's fault. It's the Islanders for screwing it up.
I understand it's not entirely his fault, but still, the poor man's career ended.
I didn't say it was his fault at all. Wait a minute. I never said it was his fault at all. It's not his fault at all that he got that contract. It's the Islanders' fault because, again, the two problems were, one, 15 years, Jimmy? Come on. That's ridiculous.
Okay.
$67.5 million in hockey money is like $289 million in baseball money. Like that's literally what you compare it to.
All right.
And since you have no money for anything else, your scouting department sucked, and your coaching staff was always trash, and the owner, God rest his soul, didn't do a good job of giving a crap about the team, DiPietro's not going to win. He has no shot. It's not his fault because it's not fair to him. The team wasn't good around him. So I sympathize with him, and I don't blame him at all. I blame the Islanders for this. They shot themselves in the foot twice on this deal. So that was one of my honorable mentions. But number one is the same number one that you have, and it's Jamarcus Russell. And I really...
At least we agree there.
Right, exactly. So, again, drafted in 2007, number one overall. Richest rookie deal in NFL history. He played 3 years and was hot garbage from the start. By the way, his contract, 6 years, $61 million contract. 32 of it was guaranteed. He played in a measly 31 games in the National Football League, and when he was cut, he walked away from $40 million freaking dollars. Oh, and you want to hear how really bad the contract was? Let's go through the percentages of how much he would make per something. Ready? Here we go.
Let's go.
Per season, Jamarcus Russell made $13.33 million per season. Okay? Per game. Jamarcus Russell was making just under $1.3 million per touchdown. Now, this is where you're going to really flip out, Jamie.
Oh, God.
Per touchdown, $7.7 million. Think about that. Every time, as Jimmy just walked away, he can't believe it. Think about this. Every time he threw a touchdown, even if you're getting your ass kicked all the time, you're making $7.7 million per touchdown. Per completion. Now, luckily, this is not in the millions, okay? So you can breathe a little bit. But he was making $112,994.
Oh, is that all?
Per completion. So if he completed 10 passes in one game, he just made $1 million. Think about that. Think about the incentives. This is what's the best part about incentives is that you can make money even albeit it's small money, but it's a lot more than most people, by doing one small thing. So think about it. You threw a touchdown pass, right? You throw a touchdown pass, but your team's down by 30 points. It doesn't matter. You just made little less than $8 million. I mean, you're great. And I'm sure Jamarcus Russell has enough money to live the rest of his life in somewhat decent, living capacity and everything. And I hope he's doing well.
Right, yeah.
He was going to make a comeback a couple years ago, but let's be honest, it wasn't going to happen.
That's never going to happen.
Just, you hear those numbers because that's how specific. It just shows you how bad the deal was in general. Because, again, people say, well, where's Ryan Leaf? Well, here's the thing. Ryan Leaf didn't sign a $60 million. I think he made something like $15 million at most.
Yeah.
And at least Ryan Leaf went like 2-0 in his first 2 starts and threw like 7 touchdown passes. Like he had some success. Jamarcus Russell never got off the ground. And he was bad right from the get-go. So that is why I agree with you that Jamarcus Russell has the worst contract in sports history.
At least we agree there. And with that will wrap it up for this episode of the Bottom Line Podcast. If you agree or disagree with any of our lists, or if you want to submit your own list, leave a comment right down below this video if you're watching on YouTube, and also leave a like as well. It really helps out tremendously. But you can also let us know on Twitter at BottomLineWMCX, at The NVP Show. Use hashtag BottomLine. Leave a voice message on Anchor as well, or Anchor.fm. And please make sure you subscribe on YouTube as well as Apple, Google, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for the Bottom Line Podcast, but please include my first name, Jimmy. Neil, the 180th episode is done. I still cannot believe we are nearing 200. And again, we just want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all the support. It really does mean a lot. Hopefully, by the time we reach 200, I won't be walking off the set anymore like in this episode. But in all seriousness, but thank you guys so much for all the support. It really does mean a ton. And we're not going anywhere anytime soon. We're still here. We're ready to go. We're here to entertain you. We're here to talk sports or pretty much anything in the sports world and life as well. But Neil, I want to thank you again as well. You've been nothing short of a great co-host and a great friend over the years, and I'm really looking forward to keep doing this for many years to come.
Thank you. Same here.
Thanks a lot, my man. I really appreciate it. But that'll do it for us this episode and for this week. Stay tuned for updates on Twitter at BottomLineWMCX for episodes for next week. For Neil Villapiano, I'm Jimmy Finizzi. This is the Bottom Line Podcast, and we thank you very much. See you in the next episode. Peace out.